Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you a powerful and chilling story that will challenge everything you believe about life and death. Let's meet Delphine Raynor, an ordinary woman who went through an extraordinary experience during the birth of her son. She died for a few moments and returned with stunning revelations about the purpose of creation. What she discovered on the other side, surrounded by divine light, will leave you completely speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now get ready for this transformative journey full of mysteries. My name is Delphine Raynor, and I have a story to tell that has completely changed my perception of life and death. I'm 34 years old and live in Boulder, Colorado with my husband Gideon. I am an ordinary person, like many of you, with a life full of joys, challenges, and memorable moments. But there is one event in particular that stands out in my existence, something that transcends anything I had ever experienced or imagined possible. What I'm about to share with you is my near-death experience, an event that occurred during the birth of my first child. It is a journey that has taken me beyond the limits of our physical world, into a realm of light, love, and knowledge that defies common human understanding. Before that day, I was a skeptical person when it came to spiritual matters. I believed that life ended with the death of the physical body, and any idea contrary to that seemed to me to be a product of the imagination or of the human desire to find comfort in the face of the unknown. But what I experienced that day at the Boulder Hospital not only challenged my previous beliefs, it completely transformed them. This is a story of transformation, discovery, and a love that transcends the barriers of our earthly understanding. It is an account of the nature of our existence, the purpose of life, and the journey each of us is destined to take. I ask that you who are listening or reading this narrative keep an open mind. What I am about to share may seem unbelievable. It may challenge your logic and beliefs. But I can assure you that every word I will say is true, at least as far as my memory and my capacity for expression allow me to convey. This experience occurred a few years ago, but it remains as vivid in my memory as if it had happened yesterday. Every detail, every sensation, every revelation is etched into my soul in a way that life's ordinary experiences simply cannot match. I'm sharing this story not to convince anyone of an absolute truth, but to offer a different perspective on life, death, and what may lie beyond. My hope is that by listening to my story, you may find comfort, inspiration, or at the very least, a new perspective on your own existence. So let's start this journey together. A journey that begins in a birthing room in Boulder, Colorado, but will take us far beyond the limits of our physical world into a realm of light, love, and universal knowledge. It all started on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, the birth of my first child. I was in the hospital in Boulder, Colorado in labor. Expectation and anxiety mixed in my chest as I prepared to bring a new life into the world. Gideon, my husband, was by my side, holding my hand and encouraging me through each contraction. The hours passed, and labor intensified. The pain was intense, but I was determined to get through it. I took a deep breath, focused on the idea of holding my baby in my arms. However, something started to go wrong. I felt my body weaken. My strength was quickly draining away. The medical team moved frantically around me, their voices becoming increasingly distant and muffled. It was then that everything changed. My vision began to darken around the edges, as if a black veil was being pulled over my eyes. I tried to speak, to call for Gideon, but my voice wouldn't come. Panic began to set in, but it was quickly replaced by a strange, unexpected sensation. I felt like something was coming off the top of my head. It was an indescribable sensation, as if my essence was being gently pulled out of my body. There was no pain, just a surprising lightness. At that moment, I had a clear realization that my soul was separating from my physical body. The transition was smooth, almost imperceptible. One moment I was lying in the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses, and the next moment, I found myself hovering above my own body. It was a surreal sight. There I was, my physical body motionless on the bed, pale and lifeless as the medical team worked frantically to revive me. I looked down and saw Gideon, his face contorted with worry and fear. I wanted to comfort him, tell him that he was okay, that he wasn't afraid. But I realized that I had no voice, no physical form to play or be heard. At that moment, I understood that something extraordinary was happening. There was no fear, just an intense curiosity and a sense of peace that I had never experienced before. It was as if all earthly worries and fears were left behind along with my physical body. Then, almost instantly, I was enveloped in complete darkness. It was not a frightening or oppressive darkness but a calm and welcoming emptiness. It was as if I were floating in a space without limits, without time, without form. At that moment, I was absolutely certain that I had left my physical body behind and was entering a completely new and unknown realm. The sensation was of being between worlds, as if I had left the earthly plane, but had not yet reached my final destination. Time seemed to not exist in this space. It could have been a second or an eternity. There was no way of knowing. It was at that moment that the realization hit me with full force. I was alive, but not in the sense we usually understand. My physical body may have stopped functioning, but my consciousness, my essence, continued to exist. It was an overwhelming revelation. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Gratitude for this experience, for this indisputable proof that life continues beyond physical death. Any doubt, any skepticism I might have had before dissipated in that instant. I knew, with a certainty that transcended any earthly logic or reasoning, that death was not the end. This realization brought with it a deep peace and intense curiosity. What would come next? Where would this journey take me? I was ready to find out, open to whatever the universe had to show me. As I floated in that dark space, feeling gratitude and peace wash over me, something began to change. The darkness around me began to transform. It was as if the very essence of the void was changing, becoming something more. Slowly, the darkness began to give way to a gray fog. It was not an abrupt transition, but a gradual and fascinating process to watch. It was as if every particle of the space around me was transforming individually. The mist was not static. It moved and floated around me, creating patterns and shapes that seemed to have a life of their own. I watched in amazement as the mist continued to transform. Little by little, it became clearer, more luminous. It was as if light itself was rising from the center of the mist, radiating outward in all directions. And then, in a moment that seemed both instantaneous and eternal, the fog completely dissipated, giving way to a vibrant, dynamic white light. This light was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't just brilliant. It pulsed with life and energy. It was as if every particle of light had its own consciousness, its own vitality. Light was not static or passive. It moved, danced, pulsated. Sometimes it formed intricate patterns. Other times it expanded into gentle waves. It was mesmerizing to watch their movements, their eternal, ever-changing dance. As I watched, fascinated, I felt as if the light was calling me. It was not an audible call, but an irresistible attraction. It was as if every fiber of my being was being gently pulled toward that wonderful light. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. I felt completely safe, completely at peace. I allowed myself to be carried by the light. I let myself be enveloped by it. As I got closer, I could feel the heat emanating from her. It wasn't physical warmth, but a feeling of welcome, of absolute well-being. And then, in a moment of total surrender, I allowed myself to be completely enveloped by the light. It was at that moment that I experienced something that forever changed my understanding of what love is. The feeling that washed over me at that moment was something that human words simply cannot adequately describe. It was love, but a love so pure, so unconditional, so overwhelming that it made any earthly experience of love seem a pale shadow in comparison. It was like I was being bathed in pure liquid love. Every particle of my being vibrated with this loving energy. There was no judgment. There were no expectations. There were no conditions. It was simply love in its purest and most powerful form. At that moment, I understood that this love was the essence of everything. It was the force that moved the universe, that gave meaning to existence. It was the love that I always sought, that I always longed for, but that I never knew existed in such magnitude. I felt completely accepted, completely understood. All my flaws, all my mistakes, all my imperfections, none of it mattered in the face of this love. I was loved not in spite of my imperfections, but with them, because of them. Every aspect of my being was embraced and celebrated by this loving light. The feeling was one of total ecstasy. It was as if every cell of my being was singing with joy. I felt more alive than I had ever felt, more connected, more complete. And as I floated in this ocean of unconditional love, I began to realize that I wasn't just a passive recipient of that love. I was part of it. My essence was intertwined with this light, with this love. I was, in my deepest essence, made of that same love. It was a revelation that shook the foundations of my being. All my life I had seen myself as separate, as an individual entity struggling to find its place in the world. But now I understood that I was never truly separate. I have always been and always will be an integral part of that universal love. At that moment, all barriers dissolved. There was no longer I and other. There was no more separation. There was only unity, only love. And in that unity, in that love, I found a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. It was like coming home after a long journey. It was recognition, it was acceptance, it was love in its purest and most powerful form. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended all doubt, that this was real. This was the fundamental truth of existence. As I remained immersed in this light of unconditional love, something new began to happen. It was as if light itself was transforming into pure knowledge. I began to receive what I can only describe as blocks of information, packets of knowledge that were transferred directly into my consciousness without the need for words or explanations. The first block of knowledge I received was a profound revelation about the nature of my own existence. I realized, with crystal clarity, that my soul, the essence of my being, was immortal, eternal, and indestructible. It wasn't just a belief or a hope. It was absolute and unquestionable knowledge. I understood that what I had always considered as me, my personality, my thoughts, my fears and desires, was just a small part of a much larger and vaster being. My true essence existed beyond time and space, beyond birth and death. It was an integral part of the fabric of the universe, a unique expression of the all-pervading divine love. This realization brought with it an indescribable feeling of freedom. All the fears I ever had about death, about the end of existence, simply dissolved. I understood that death, as we understand it on Earth, is just a transition, a change of state. Our essence, our true nature, continues to exist eternally. The second block of knowledge I received was equally profound and transformative. I understood that the universe operates based on a perfect plan, and that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Every event, every interaction, every moment, it's all part of a cosmic design of incredible complexity and beauty. This revelation did not mean that everything in life was easy or pleasant. I understood that the suffering, challenges, and difficulties we face in earthly life have a purpose. These are opportunities for growth, for learning, for the evolution of our soul. Every challenge we face is carefully calibrated to provide us with exactly the lessons and growth we need. I realize that there are no accidents in the universe. Every encounter, every relationship, every experience, it's all part of that bigger plan. Even moments that seem chaotic or meaningless from our limited perspective have a purpose in the grand scheme of things. This understanding brought with it a deep sense of peace and acceptance. I understood that we don't need to fight life's circumstances or resent the difficulties we face. Each experience, whether pleasant or painful, is an opportunity for growth and evolution. What surprised me was how I received this knowledge. It wasn't like learning something new, but like remembering something I always knew but had forgotten. It was as if these truths were engraved in my soul, and the near-death experience simply removed the veil that obscured them. The acceptance of these truths was immediate and absolute. There were no doubts, there were no questions. It was as if every fiber of my being resonated with the truth of these revelations. I knew, with a certainty that transcended any earthly logic or reasoning, that what I was experiencing was real and true. As I absorbed this knowledge, I felt my consciousness expand. It was as if the boundaries of my being were dissolving, and I could perceive and understand things that were far beyond my normal capabilities. I could feel the connections between all things, the interdependence of all creation. In this expanded state of consciousness, I began to understand the greater purpose of existence. I realized that we are all on a journey of spiritual evolution, constantly growing, learning, and expanding. Each life, each experience, is an opportunity to come closer to our true divine nature. I also understood that love, the same unconditional love I was experiencing, is the driving force behind all creation. It is love that drives us to evolve, to grow, to become more. It is love that heals, that transforms, that redeems. As I absorbed these revelations, I felt immense gratitude flood my being. Gratitude for life, for the opportunity to exist and experience. Gratitude for the challenges and difficulties I faced, because now I could see the purpose behind them. Gratitude for the love that permeates everything, that sustains and guides us. In that moment, I felt completely at peace. All the worries, fears, and anxieties I had ever experienced in my earthly life seemed insignificant in the face of this greater understanding. I knew that no matter what happened, everything would be okay in the end. As I continued to absorb this universal knowledge, the intensity of the experience began to increase. The light around me grew brighter, the love more intense, the knowledge deeper. It was as if I was getting closer and closer to the source of all existence. As the intensity of the experience continued to increase, I felt myself reaching a climax. The light around me became brighter and brighter, almost blinding, but somehow I could still see clearly. The love that surrounded me became more intense with each moment, filling every particle of my being with a feeling of indescribable ecstasy. Knowledge continued to flow into my consciousness in ever-increasing waves. It was as if I was approaching the source of all wisdom, of all truth. Each revelation brought with it a deeper understanding of the nature of reality, the purpose of existence, the interconnectedness of all things. At this point, I felt as if I were on the verge of a final revelation, a truth so profound and all-encompassing that it contained within itself all the answers to every question that had ever been or would ever be asked. It was like being on the verge of understanding the very mystery of existence. However, as I approached this culmination, I began to feel that the intensity of the experience was becoming almost unbearable. It wasn't an unpleasant or painful sensation, but it was as if my consciousness was being stretched to its maximum limit. I felt like if the intensity increased any more, even just a little, I might lose myself completely. It was as if my sense of individuality, the last thread connecting me to my earthly existence, was about to completely dissolve into the vastness of the whole. It was at that moment, when I was on the verge of completely merging with the light, that something changed. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the intensity began to diminish. The light began to soften. The flow of knowledge began to slow down. It was not an abrupt or shocking change, but a smooth and gentle transition. It was as if the universe, in its infinite wisdom, knew exactly how much I could handle and was guiding me back to a more manageable state. As the intensity subsided, I felt a mixture of relief and a hint of disappointment. Part of me yearned to continue, to delve even deeper into the mysteries of the universe, but another part recognized that I had received more than I could have ever imagined. more than my human mind could fully process. As the light softened, I realized I was still immersed in love and knowledge, but in a softer, more accessible way. It was as if the universe was giving me time to absorb and integrate everything I had experienced. In this calmer state, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. I realized that although I could not take with me all the details of the knowledge I had received, the essence of the experience was engraved in my soul. I had been fundamentally transformed by this journey. I felt a deep peace settle in my being, a peace that came from the absolute certainty that everything is fine, everything is as it should be, a peace that was born from the understanding that we are eternally loved and cared for by a force greater than we can comprehend. As I floated in this state of peace and contemplation, I began to feel a subtle shift around me. The light, which had been my environment throughout this journey, began to transform again. But this time, instead of increasing in intensity, it began to take shape and substance. As the light changed, I began to notice shapes and colors emerging around me. Gradually, as if emerging from a dream, I found myself in a completely new and dazzling environment. I was in a lush green meadow, so vast that it stretched as far as I could see. The first thing that struck me was the intensity of the colors. The green of the grass was more vibrant than any shade I had ever seen on earth. It was as if every leaf, every wisp of grass was alive and pulsing with its own inner light. The sky above was a deep, rich blue, dotted with clouds that seemed to be made of pure light. Flowers of every color imaginable dotted the meadow, their petals shining as if they were made of translucent crystals. Each flower seemed to have its own aura, emanating colors that danced and mixed in the air around it. The air was pure and invigorating, filled with a sweet fragrance that I couldn't identify but that made me feel instantly refreshed and alert. Each breath seemed to fill me not just with air, but with pure, vital energy. As I looked around me in wonder, I noticed that there were trees scattered throughout the meadow. They were majestic trees, with thick trunks and lush crowns that stretched towards the sky. Its leaves sparkled as if they were made of liquid emerald, and its branches seemed to sing a silent melody to the gentle wind that blew. What struck me most about this surreal scenario was the feeling of life that permeated everything. It wasn't just that the plants and trees were alive. It was as if the very air, the very ground beneath my feet, was pulsing with consciousness and vitality. Each element of the landscape seemed to be in perfect harmony with every other, creating a visual symphony of beauty and balance. As I took in this stunning scene, I noticed something even more extraordinary. Time seemed to work differently in this place. There was no feeling of the passage of time as we know it on Earth. It was as if each moment was eternal, containing within it the entire past and the entire future. I observed a flower next to me and saw that it was constantly changing. Its petals opened and closed in a continuous cycle of flowering and renewal. However, this did not happen in a linear sequence as we are used to. It was as if all stages of the flower's life were happening simultaneously, in an eternal dance of growth and transformation. I looked up at the sky and saw that the sun, if I can call it that, as it was more like a source of pure light, was not moving. There was no day or night, just a soft golden light that bathed everything in eternal twilight. This light did not come from a specific direction, but seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, as if the air itself was illuminated. As I walked through the meadow, I realized that my movement was not like walking on earth. It was more like floating or gliding. There was no feeling of heaviness or effort. All I had to do was think about moving in a direction, and my being would respond instantly. I touched a nearby leaf and was surprised to feel not only its texture, but also its essence. It was as if, through touch, I could perceive the plant's history, its connection with the earth, with the sun, with the entire ecosystem around it. Each touch connected me deeply with the web of life that permeated this place. As I explored this fascinating environment, I felt a deep peace settle into my being. There was no rush, there was no anxiety. There was only the present moment, rich in beauty and meaning. I felt as if I could spend eternity exploring every detail of this wonderful meadow and still discover something new every moment. It was then that I noticed something in the distance, on top of a gentle hill. Figures moved there, shapes that looked human but at the same time were unlike anything I had ever seen. I felt an intense curiosity invade me. Who would these figures be? What else did this incredible place have to show me? With this curiosity guiding my being, I began moving toward the hill, eager to discover the next chapter of this extraordinary journey. As I approached the hill, the figures I had seen began to take shape and definition. It was a group of beings, around 18 to 20, all dressed in vibrantly colored robes that seemed to flow and move as if they had a life of their own. The colors of the tunics were of indescribable beauty, some that I had never seen before and for which I have no words to describe. As I got closer, I realized that these beings weren't exactly like humans, but they weren't completely different either. They had a humanoid shape, but there was something ethereal, almost translucent about their appearance. His features were serene and full of wisdom. His eyes shone with an inner light that seemed to contain the knowledge of ages. Before I could take another step towards them, something extraordinary happened. In the blink of an eye, without any sensation of movement, I found myself before them at the top of the hill. It was as if space itself had bent to take me there, or as if I had been instantly transported by the power of my own thought. The beings greeted me with warm and welcoming smiles. There were no words spoken, but I could feel his welcome, his acceptance, and his love emanating in almost tangible waves. It was as if they were welcoming me back after a long journey, like old friends who had been eagerly awaiting my return. Among them, one being in particular stood out. He was an older-looking man, with long silver hair and a beard that looked like it was made of light. Her eyes were a deep, sparkling blue, as if they contained entire galaxies. He approached me, and I felt an aura of wisdom and compassion so intense, it almost brought me to my knees. When he began to communicate with me, it was not through spoken words, but through a form of telepathy that went beyond simple thoughts. It was a communication that involved emotions, images, entire concepts transmitted in an instant. With kindness and compassion, he confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. I had, in fact, died. My physical body had ceased to function during the complicated birth. However, he assured that this was not my time to stay on this plan. My journey on Earth was not yet complete. There was more for me to learn, experience, and accomplish. This revelation brought with it a complex mix of emotions. On the one hand, there was a part of me that longed to stay, that wanted to keep exploring this wonderful realm and taking in all the knowledge and love it offered. On the other hand, I felt a pang of worry for my baby, my husband, and the life I had left behind. The wise being, noticing my confusion, sent me a wave of understanding and comfort. Through our telepathic communication, he assured me that my baby was fine and would be lovingly cared for. He showed me visions of the future, fleeting images of my son growing up, smiling, living a full life. These visions brought tears to my eyes, or at least the sensation of tears, since I no longer had a physical body. Encouraged by this display of compassion, I felt moved to ask a question that was weighing on my heart. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, I asked about my sins, about the failures and mistakes I had made in my earthly life. Part of me feared judgment, condemnation for the times I had fallen short of what I was meant to be. The wise being's smile widened, radiating a love and understanding that instantly dispelled my fears. His answer came not in words, but in a deep understanding that formed in my mind. Sins, as we understand them on earth, do not exist on this plane. What really matters is what is in our heart, our intentions, our desire to grow and evolve. At that moment, I had a vision of my own soul. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not my physical appearance, but my deepest essence. What I saw left me amazed. My soul, like that of all human beings, was made of pure love. It was like a multifaceted jewel, each facet representing an experience, a lesson learned, a moment of growth. I realized that the experiences I considered sins or mistakes were simply parts of my learning and growth process. Every challenge, every mistake, every moment of weakness had contributed to shaping who I was, to making me grow and evolve. There was no judgment, just acceptance and unconditional love. This revelation was profoundly liberating. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. The guilt, the regret, the fear of judgment, it all dissolved in the light of love and understanding that enveloped me. The other beings around also contributed to this experience. Each of them emanated a love and acceptance that made me feel completely safe and welcomed. It was as if each of them were a mirror, reflecting back to me different aspects of my own divinity. As I absorbed these revelations, I felt a growing curiosity about the greater purpose of it all. What did everything I was experiencing mean? What was the ultimate meaning of existence, of life, of death, of this spiritual realm? Driven by this curiosity, I summoned the courage to ask the wisest being the most profound question of all. What is the purpose of all creation? The being smiled again, his eyes sparkling with ancient wisdom. He began to share with me a truth so vast, so profound, that I felt my consciousness expanding just to try to understand it. It was as if the very fabric of the universe was unfolding before me, revealing its most intimate secrets. The answer came in waves of understanding, each one deeper than the last. I saw the interconnectedness of all things, the eternal flow of energy and consciousness that permeates all existence. I understood that each being, each particle, each moment is a unique and necessary expression of the whole. However, as this revelation unfolded, I realized something was changing. The clarity of vision was beginning to dissipate, as if a fog was forming in my mind. The images and understandings that had been so vivid were beginning to become fleeting, slipping through the fingers of my consciousness like fine sand. I tried to hold on to these truths, desperate not to lose the precious knowledge I was receiving. But it was like trying to hold water with your hands open. The more I tried, the more knowledge seemed to slip away. At that moment, I felt a subtle change in the environment around me. The light began to dim, and the spiritual beings began to move away. The wise being smiled at me one last time, his eyes full of understanding and love. He didn't need to say anything. I knew my time in this realm was coming to an end. A tugging sensation began to form, as if an invisible thread was pulling me back. The stunning landscape of the verdant meadow began to dissipate, giving way to a darkness that was not threatening, but rather familiar. As darkness enveloped me, I heard a distant sound. It was an irritating and insistent sound, completely at odds with the harmony of the spiritual realm I was leaving. The sound got louder, closer, until I opened my eyes with a start. The bright, blinding light of the hospital room momentarily blinded me. The rhythmic, irritating beeping of medical machines filled my ears, replacing the heavenly harmony I had experienced moments before. My body felt heavy and clumsy, so different from the lightness I had felt in the spiritual realm. Every breath was an effort, every movement a fight against gravity that seemed to want to pull me back to the bed. I blinked several times, trying to focus my vision. The shapes around me began to become clear. I saw anxious faces leaning over me, doctors and nurses, their eyes wide with a mixture of relief and disbelief. A doctor, her face marked by fatigue and tension, was performing a cardiac massage on my chest. When our eyes met, I saw shock and then joy spread across his features. "She's back," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with emotion. "It's a miracle." The words seemed distant and foreign to me. I was struggling to reconcile two completely different realities, the spiritual realm I had just left and the physical world I had returned to. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry and scratchy. A nurse quickly brought a glass of water with a straw, helping me take small sips. The cold water was both comforting and strange. I had forgotten the feeling of thirst, of physical need. As the medical team bustled around me, checking my vitals and making adjustments to equipment, my mind was in a whirl. The memories of my experience were still vivid, but they were already beginning to become hazy around the edges, like a dream that begins to dissipate upon awakening. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to hold onto the sensations, the visions, the knowledge I had gained. But it was like trying to hold in smoke. The harder I tried, the more it seemed to escape. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Gideon rushing into the room. His face was pale, marked by dried tears and sleepless nights. When his eyes met mine, I saw a wave of emotions pass through him. Disbelief, relief, love. He rushed to my side, taking my hand in his. "Delphine," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I thought I lost you." I wanted to tell him everything I had experienced. I wanted to share the deep truths I had learned, but words seemed inadequate, unable to capture the magnitude of what I had experienced. Instead, I shook his hand and managed a small smile. "I'm here," I whispered back. It was at that moment that I remembered, with a jolt of worry, my baby. I looked at Gideon, a silent question in my eyes. Understanding immediately, he smiled through his tears. "He's fine," he said. "Our son is fine. He is perfect." Immense relief washed over me. The visions that the wise being had shown me, my son growing up, smiling, living a full life, came to my mind. I realized that, somehow, I already knew he would be okay. In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, I tried to process everything that had happened. The doctors were perplexed by my recovery. According to them, I had been clinically dead for several minutes. My return was something they couldn't explain medically. I often found myself looking out the hospital window, my thoughts returning to the green meadow, to the beings of light, to the profound truths I had glimpsed. Part of me longed for that peace, that unconditional love that I had experienced. But at the same time, I felt a new appreciation for the life that had been given back to me. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment with my newborn son and with Gideon. It all felt like a precious gift. I knew I had returned for a reason, that I still had lessons to learn, experiences to live, love to share on this earthly plane. And although the specific memories of my near-death experience began to become less clear over time, the essence of what I learned remained with me. The certainty of unconditional love that permeates all existence. The understanding that we are all part of something bigger, interconnected in ways that go beyond our earthly understanding. The peace that comes from knowing that death is not the end, but just a transition. These truths became the foundation of my new life. A life I was determined to live fully, with gratitude, love, and a renewed sense of purpose. In the months and years that followed my near-death experience, I realized that my worldview had profoundly changed. It was as if I was seeing everything through a new lens, one that revealed the hidden beauty and meaning in every moment of everyday life. The colors seemed more vibrant, almost as if they were alive. Sometimes, when looking at a flower in the garden or the sky at sunset, I would have flashbacks of the lush green meadow and its indescribable colors. These moments filled me with bittersweet nostalgia, a longing for a place I knew I would one day see again. My relationship with time has also changed drastically. Before, I was always in a hurry, always thinking about the next appointment, the next goal to be achieved. Now, I found myself living much more in the present moment. Every moment seemed to contain an eternity, full of possibilities and meaning. The way I related to the people around me also changed. I vividly remembered the sense of interconnectedness I had experienced, the understanding that we are all, at our core, made of the same divine love. It made me look at every person I met with more compassion and empathy. Even in conflict situations or when faced with people I would have previously considered difficult, I was now able to see beyond appearances. I saw in them the same light that I had seen in myself and in spiritual beings. This didn't mean I would never get angry or frustrated again, but those negative emotions were now more fleeting, less intense. My relationship with nature also deepened. I began to feel a stronger connection to the natural world, a reverence for all forms of life. Walks in the forest or moments of contemplation by the sea have become almost like spiritual experiences for me. In these moments, I could almost feel the same vibration of life and consciousness that I had experienced in the spiritual realm. One of the most profound changes was in relation to the fear of death. Before my experience, I had an almost paralyzing fear of death, both my own and the possibility of losing loved ones. Now, although he still deeply valued life and did not wish to leave it prematurely, the fear had been replaced by calm acceptance. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond faith or belief, that death was not the end, that we were eternal beings on a continuous journey of growth and evolution. That didn't mean I didn't feel sadness when thinking about the possibility of being separated from my loved ones, but that sadness was now tempered with a deeper understanding of the cycle of life and death. My relationship with spirituality has also transformed. Before, I had a very skeptical and materialistic view of the world. Now, although I still valued critical thinking and science, I had opened my mind to dimensions of reality that go beyond what we can measure and quantify. I did not identify with any specific religion after my experience. He felt that the truth he had glimpsed was too great to be contained in any dogma or doctrine. Instead, I developed my own spiritual practice, based on meditation, contemplation of nature, and acts of compassion and service to others. My career also took a new direction. Before, I worked in corporate marketing, always focused on moving up the career ladder and making more money. After my experience, I realized that this path no longer brought me satisfaction. I decided to return to university to study psychology and counseling. I felt a strong calling to help other people find meaning in their lives and deal with trauma and loss. My work became a way to share, albeit indirectly, the lessons I had learned during my near-death experience. Although I rarely spoke explicitly about what I had experienced with my clients, the principles of unconditional love, acceptance, and interconnection that I had experienced deeply informed my therapeutic approach. However, not everything was easy upon my return. There were moments of deep nostalgia for the spiritual realm I had experienced. At times, the beauty and love I had felt there seemed so intense compared to everyday life that I felt almost depressed. It was as if I had glimpsed paradise, and now had to live with the memory of it while navigating the complexities and challenges of earthly life. Additionally, there was the frustration of not being able to fully remember or articulate everything I had learned. The profound revelations about the purpose of existence that the wise being had shared with me always seemed to be on the tip of my tongue, but I was unable to fully express them. It was like trying to describe a complex symphony when you can only remember a few scattered notes. My relationship with Gideon also went through changes. He had been incredibly supportive and understanding, but I knew that at times he struggled to understand the profound changes that had occurred in me. There were times when I felt distant from him, as if we were living in different worlds. However, with time and many frank conversations, we managed to find a new balance. Gideon, although he could not directly share my experience, was open to exploring these new perspectives on life and death with me. Our relationship, in many ways, has deepened, becoming richer and more multifaceted. Raising our son, Thomas, in light of this new understanding, also brought its own challenges and joys. I saw him not just as my son, but as a spiritual being on his own journey of growth and evolution. This sometimes made it difficult to impose limits or discipline in the traditional way, but it also allowed me to have greater patience and understanding with him. As Thomas grew older, I began to notice a wisdom and sensitivity in him that seemed beyond his years. Sometimes, when I looked into his eyes, I had the impression of seeing something from the spiritual realm he had visited. This made me wonder, are children closer to this kingdom than us adults? Could it be that, as we grow, we move away from wisdom we already possess? Over the years, I've found a balance between honoring the depth of my near-death experience and living fully in this world. I learned to appreciate the beauty and meaning in small, everyday things. A smile from a stranger, the sound of rain, the feel of the sun on my skin. Every moment became an opportunity for connection, for love, for growth. At the same time, I kept the awareness of a greater reality alive within me, In moments of challenge or sadness, I remembered the unconditional love I had experienced, the certainty that everything is part of a greater plan. This didn't eliminate the pain or difficulties, but it gave me strength and perspective to face them. I decided, after much reflection, to share my story with a wider audience. I wrote a book about my experience, not with the aim of convincing anyone, but to offer hope and a different perspective to those who were open to it. The writing process was both therapeutic and challenging, forcing me to relive and articulate aspects of my experience that I had kept private for so long. The response to the book was surprising. I received countless messages from people who felt touched and transformed by my story. Many have shared with me their own near-death experiences or moments of spiritual transcendence. I realized that there was an immense hunger for this type of discussion, for a vision of life and death that went beyond the purely material. This led me to a new chapter in my life. I began giving talks and workshops about expanded consciousness, spirituality, and the meaning of life and death. I did not present myself as a guru or spiritual leader, but simply as someone who had had an extraordinary experience and wanted to share the lessons I had learned. In these talks, I always emphasized that my experience was personal and that each person should find their own truth. He encouraged people to question, to explore, to seek their own experiences of transcendence, whether through meditation, connecting with nature, art, or any other medium that resonated with them. As I grew older, I felt an increasing peace with the idea of my own mortality. I knew that when the time came to leave this plane again, I would just be returning home. But until then, I was determined to live each moment fully, to love deeply, to constantly learn and grow. Looking back on that fateful day in the delivery room, I see how a single experience can completely change the course of a life. My journey beyond life was not the end, but a new beginning, a beginning that led me to a richer, deeper, more meaningful life than I could have ever imagined. And so, as the years pass, I continue my journey in this world, with one foot in the spiritual realm I have experienced. Every day is an opportunity to bring a little more of that love, of that light, into this world. Every interaction, a chance to see the divine in another. Every challenge, an opportunity for growth. My near-death experience was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter of discovery, of love, and of a deeper understanding of the wondrous mystery that is existence. As I come to the end of this narrative, I realize that sharing my near-death experience is both a challenge and a privilege. A challenge because words seem inadequate to capture the depth and magnitude of what I experienced. A privilege because I feel like I've been given a glimpse of something beyond common human understanding. And sharing this can bring hope and a new perspective to others. Reflecting on everything that has happened since that day in the delivery room, I see how my near-death experience became a turning point in my life, a watershed that separated the before and the after. It was not just an isolated event, but something that continued to unfold and reveal new meanings over the years. One of the most profound lessons I've learned is about the nature of love. The love I experienced in the spiritual realm was so vast, so unconditional, that it made the love we knew on earth seem a pale shadow in comparison. However, I do not see this as a diminution of earthly love, but as an invitation to expand our capacity to love. Since my experience, I've strived to bring some of that unconditional love into my everyday relationships. It's not always easy. Human fears, insecurities, and conditioning often get in the way. But each time I can transcend these limitations, even for a moment, and truly love without conditions or expectations, I feel like I am honoring the truth that has been revealed to me. Another crucial lesson was about the nature of reality. My experience has shown me that what we perceive with our physical senses is just a fraction of a much larger and more complex reality. This does not mean that our physical reality is illusory or unimportant. On the contrary, it is a crucial expression of that greater reality, a playing field where our souls can grow and evolve. This understanding fundamentally changed the way I view life's challenges and difficulties. Not that I always welcome them with open arms, but now I see them as opportunities for growth. as part of a greater plan whose purpose we cannot always fully understand from our limited perspective. The issue of death also gained a new dimension in my life. Before, death was something to be feared, avoided at all costs. Now, although I deeply value life and do not wish to leave it prematurely, I view death with serene acceptance. I know that when my time comes, it will not be an end, but a transition to another state of being. This perspective has brought incredible freedom to my life. It freed me from the paralyzing fear of death that often prevents us from living fully. It allowed me to embrace life with more courage, more openness, more joy. However, it is important to note that my experience did not eliminate all doubts or questions from my life. There is still a lot that I don't understand, a lot that intrigues and challenges me. The difference is that now I approach these uncertainties not with fear or frustration, but with a sense of wonder and curiosity. My near-death experience showed me that the universe is much vaster, more complex and more wonderful than we could ever imagine. It showed me that there is more mystery, more magic to existence than our current belief systems or scientific theories can fully explain. This does not mean that we should abandon reason or critical thinking. On the contrary, I believe we need to expand our definition of rationality to include experiences and phenomena that go beyond the purely physical or measurable. One of the questions I am often asked is, "Are you afraid of dying again?" My answer is always the same. I am not afraid of death itself, but I have a deep respect for life. Every day is a precious gift, an opportunity to love, learn, and grow. I don't want to waste this opportunity. At the same time, I know that when the time comes to leave again, it will be like coming home. I vividly remember the sense of peace, of belonging, that I experienced in the spiritual realm. It's a memory I carry with me, a comfort in difficult times, a reminder of the beauty and love that awaits us. Another common question is whether my experience made me join a specific religion. The answer is no. While I respect all spiritual and religious traditions, I feel that the truth I have glimpsed is too great to be contained in any specific dogma or doctrine. My religion, if I can call it that, is love. It is the daily practice of seeing the divine in each person, in each being, in each moment. I am sometimes asked if I would recommend a near-death experience to others. This question always makes me smile. It is not something we can choose or plan for. It is a profound and transformative experience, but also potentially traumatic. What I recommend is that each person seeks their own experiences of transcendence, whether through meditation, connecting with nature, art, or any other practice that resonates with them. As I get older, I feel more and more grateful to have had this experience, not just for the experience itself, but for all the ways it transformed my life. I am grateful for the new perspective it has given me, the purpose it has brought to my life, the deep connections it has allowed me to form with others. At the same time, I am aware that my journey is far from over. Each day brings new lessons, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. I continue to learn, to evolve, to expand my understanding of what it means to be human and, at the same time, be part of something much bigger. If there is one final message I would like to leave you with, it is this. We do not need a near-death experience to live with love, purpose, and expanded consciousness. Each of us has within us the ability to transcend our limitations, to touch the divine, to experience unconditional love. It's always there, waiting for us to recognize it. My hope is that by sharing my story, I can inspire others to explore their own depths, to question their assumptions about reality, to live with more love and compassion. Because in the end, that is what our journey on this earthly plane is all about love, about growth, about evolution of the soul. And so, I conclude this narrative not with a full stop, but with reticence. Because the journey continues, the mystery unfolds, and each day brings new opportunities for discovery and transformation. Life, in all its beauty and complexity, is an ongoing miracle. And death, far from being an end, is just the beginning of a new chapter in this eternal adventure that is existence. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.